This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension for lunch, we were in Standing Finance Committee. We returned to Standing Finance Committee.
This House is in Standing Finance Committee. Honourable Member for St. James North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first wish to commend the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for its efforts over the last 5 years in positioning Barbados, repositioning Barbados again as a major player, not only in the CARICOM, but also globally. And to mention my happiness that the ministry has had the opportunity today and will continue to have the opportunity to speak towards what it's been doing in the interest of Barbados to compile with its mission statement. Senior Minister, you would know that I would have been one of those who said, look, we need to have foreign affairs debated in this lower house. I think that the last major debate on foreign affairs would have been when this Parliament discussed the EPA. I think that would have been in 2014, when I recall that you spoke for over 4 hours in leading the opposition's response in that debate. So,
Honourable Member, I think you might be in danger of misleading the House. It was 5 hours.
5 hours, well, over four. We're not going to split hairs. Over 4 hours. So, you and your officers now have this opportunity here today. First, would want to address the ministry on the issue of reform of the global, foreign service position based on what our Honourable Prime Minister has been advocating, the need to reform the Bretton Woods system, which, as we all know, the world inherited after the Second World War, where I think 48 countries might have signed on, formed the United Nations. All of our countries in the Caribbean, of course, including Barbados, would have been colonies of European countries at the time, and therefore would have had no say in the setup of the United Nations and all the other major institutions which have a direct bearing on our constituents' day-to-day existence. And the issue is now before us now more than ever of the need to reform this system, whereby, for instance, at the Security Council, 5 countries have veto power over virtually everything. And I'm wondering if you agree with me that the time is now for us to push it even more, what with the recognized global leadership of our Honourable Prime Minister. And in spite of the small size of Barbados, of course, if you could speak of the significance of Barbados within the global context and what you and your ministry believe may be the chances of reform in the foreign affairs rather than foreign service setup, which we inherited, whereby these 5 countries, because of their size and the position as effectively players who fought the Second World War and the first two, still have significant power vis-a-vis small island states like Barbados and other newly developed countries in the world.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Your question, quite frankly, is a very interesting one because it teases out a number of important issues. Bretton Woods would have seen the formation post-World War II of a number of institutions that we considered vital, the IMF and the World Bank. We all know that for us who are, and I put it this way so everybody can easily understand, the small island developing states like Barbados, who are doing our best to make sure that we do the things that people globally expect and recognize as being in compliance with the best standards of governance. And frankly speaking, we have not always gotten it absolutely right, but I think that every Barbadian would feel that by and large, this country, with the possible exception for some instances in the last decade or so, would have risen above the issues of corruption, would have tried to make sure that the best of practices were deployed in the way in which we conducted our governance affairs, would have tried to make sure that we were prudent with the management of our foreign reserves, prioritize competitiveness and growth development opportunities. I know Barbados's history has been consistently seeing a growth pattern in the 1990s of about 2 to 3%, and that would have continued again in the early part of the 21st century. we are among those countries that could be called the good boys in the class. But unfortunately, what happened? The World Bank would have looked at your gross domestic product and they would say that you are doing remarkably well. So well, in fact, that the spotlight is no longer focused on you as a developing country, but they say that your GDP is such that you are a middle-income developing country, and therefore you are graduated from access to concessional development financing. And that really has been the platform which we would have wanted to rely on traditionally through the years. The World Bank and the IMF had not historically always been the best of partners in that regard. Now we've come to a point where, for sure, with the IMF, there is a better, I think, understanding of the reality of our situation with respect to issues which are current and extremely relevant. I've used the word existential, and I'm happy that it has been bought into by the comments made with one or two other members in the House today. With respect to those existential threats that we face, we need to be able to turn to the Bretton Woods institutions and ask for the type of financing assistance that is really required and what should have been expected under ordinary circumstances to be available. The fact of the matter is that when Bretton Woods was created, however, we were still colonies. And the issues of import and significance to small island developing states were not top of mind then, and I fear have not always been top of mind now. So that, and with regard, for example, to the climate crisis, there has been a need to fashion the argument that we make in all of the international fora, as Minister Husbands has said, wherever it is that Barbados is represented, there are certain things that we table and seek support for, and the Bridgetown Initiative with respect to the question of climate and climate financing is one such example. And essentially what we are seeking there is to look at the issue of fiscal space for those of us who have to treat the ordinary development issues, even as we might from time to time become so unfortunate as we did last year or year before when we had, happily it was only a Category 1 hurricane, but a hurricane strike Barbados. Now, imagine, if you will, the existence of those people who have to contend with a Category 5 hurricane, as has happened in this region. They have to put all of their developmental priorities on pause while they try to immediately move to recover from this climatic event. In the space of 5 or 6 hours, maybe even less, the entire GDP of a country could be set back by 2 decades. It is a reality that those of us who live it experience it and understand it. And sometimes we have to try to get others to understand that there is the need for the countries to have fiscal space so as to be able to continue to do the ordinary tasks that we have to do, even though we face a climate reality or climate-induced reality. And what are those ordinary things? We still have to spend a large portion of our budget to make sure we're educating our children. In the case of Barbados, as you well know, we don't have the natural resources. Our human resource must be invested in. And unlike the previous administration, we did not choose to chop off the future of our next generation at the knees. The first order of business, in case anyone forgets, Mr. Chairman, was that this administration reinstated tertiary education being paid for via the public purse. Healthcare is another such example. We have to make sure that we have a clear commitment and a clearly defined expenditure for those people who need health care in Barbados. The health of the nation is really the wealth of this nation. We need to have proper roads and road maintenance and proper transportation. And this is not just old talk. There is a reason why, in fact, Barbados is host today to the largest electronic bus fleet to be found anywhere in the Caribbean, because we put our money where our mouth is. So that those developmental issues cannot just be put on pause simply because of the fact that you have a climatic event which you must recover from. And we have determined that wherever it is possible, we take this argument to the international community with a view to getting them to understand and to buy into the importance of reframing and revising those things that the Bretton Woods institutions have traditionally stand for, in order to bring them, even if you have to bring them kicking, screaming, to the point where they understand that there has to be an approach that is more reflective of the reality, the day-to-day lived reality of those of us in small island developing states. But it doesn't end there. What perhaps is the most silent part of this need for reform is the fact that we also have a World Trade Organization, which strictly speaking is also part of the Bretton Woods arrangement. And that too is in need of reform. The World Trade Organization obviously has done wonderful good work. We have not spoken today very much about trade, but there are some specific programs and I suppose policy directives from which we can benefit and have benefited. The disciplines of that the World Trade Organization presides over are in many cases important for ensuring that there is a democratization of international trade, and a democratization with specific interests in the well-being of small states. So that when you hear people talk about special and differential treatment, for example, that is one area where we are simply saying we are vulnerable. We are vulnerable for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that we are very often, as islands, remote from centers of industrial and economic power. We are geographically remote from them, but we are also geographically vulnerable by virtue of the fact that we are disproportionately impacted by things like hurricanes and so on and so forth. The time that we take to recover is far more significant. The damage done to our economies is far more significant in terms of the gross impact on our GDP than it would be if a hurricane of the same strength struck the eastern seaboard of the United States of America. When that happens to them, they can mobilize resources from the West Coast to come into the eastern seaboard to bring assistance. We don't have that luxury. And so therefore, those types of discussions give birth to the World Trade Organization's perspective, which is helpful to us in that regard. But there are still other things that have to be done with respect to the transformation of the World Trade Organization in order to make it perhaps a little bit more responsive, and to use your word, to reform further that institution. I don't want this to be a conversation where you only hear my voice. I have the Director of Trade, Case Seeley, here. I have the Director General of the Productive Sector, Dr. Louis Woodruff. I have Minister Husbands, who's been working with the Trade Division during the tenure of the full tenure of this administration, because Minister Husbands would have been here in this ministry from 2018. And it might be a useful thing to hear their perspectives on this question of reform.
Thank you very much, and I'll just be brief in explaining one or two things that are important for us to understand. Right now, across the world, there's a cry for the reform of the Bretton Woods institutions, because it is truly recognized that they are no longer fit for purpose to respond to the needs of today. And Richard Kozel Wright, in his book, which is deemed the New Bretton Woods, says that the global architecture has become too intrusive, so that small island states do not have the flexibility to set in place domestic policy that is beneficial to their citizens without necessarily disturbing world trade, world anything in any possible way. And a good example of that is what we went through with the WTO and the fisheries agreement. We are a small island state. We do not impact fishing more than 0.007%. Very, very little. Not even 1% for these small island states. Yet they want to limit the capacity of governments like ourselves providing subsidies to fishermen. So this affects the people in Pile Bay, in Weston, Paynes Bay, Oistins, when you want to give them some ice, a little fuel, a little help with their fishing boats. And so one of the things that we would have done is carried the battle then into the WTO. On that fisheries agreement, we would have worked with the then Blue Economy and Ministry of Blue Economy and Maritime Affairs, as well as when Minister Walcott went to the WTO at the last ministerial, this was the battle on to safeguard the capacity of small island states to make some decisions that will help their ordinary citizens without being interfered with by global rules that really were made not for us and don't support us. So this is an important thing. So it's just to show you how much reform is needed, because it's become too intrusive and it's not as helpful. But I will ask the Director General of the Productive Sector, as he is now. He was the Director General of Foreign Trade. I'll ask him to share his thoughts, and then Ms. Seeley.
Thank you, Minister, and good afternoon. I am Louis Woodruff, the Director General, Productive Sectors. Certainly I've agreed with the comments of Minister and Senior Minister regarding these issues. I would want to say, though, that we often speak of the reform of institutions, reform of the WTO, reform of IMF, reform of the World Bank, but these are just bodies. To get reform, we really need to speak to the powerful interests of countries in these institutions, because these institutions are actually member-driven. So it is not a matter of the IMF or the WTO or the World Bank reforming itself without the input and the consent of a number of very powerful developed countries. I would just want to make that one point. In terms of the WTO specifically, yes, there are some issues in there which were recognized almost from the start of the creation of the WTO in 1995. And those issues have lived on over the years. Certainly, the negotiating process has been very slow. Again, as I said, because of the interests of very powerful countries. For us, there's a small economies work program created many years ago, but which we are still trying to get implemented. There are a number of unfinished issues, such as reform of the dispute settlement mechanism, which has been in train for many years, because the issue is, how can a small economy get redress in a large body such as the WTO when its trade is so minuscule? That is a major problem. And apart from those now, we have additional issues arising relating to green subsidies, if I may call it that, as well as climate change. So apart from the old issues which have not been resolved, we do have a new set of issues which we now face and which we are going to have to fight doubly hard, certainly, in order to get those matters solved. So I want to stop there, ministers. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Honourable House, Honourable members, colleagues. My name is Kay Seeley. I am the Director of Foreign Trade in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. And I wanted to lend my voice to this discussion as it relates to reform. And just to caution a little bit that reform can be a two-edged sword. We need to be careful about the reasons why reform is being called for, especially in large institutions like the World Trade Organization. Now, in the ministry, we have been pushing our development partners to undertake a body of work relative to how the implementation of the body of agreements making up the World Trade Organization has been impacting small states, small vulnerable economies especially. And one of the things that we are mindful of is that we need to know what works for small states, what doesn't work for small states. We also need to know what, for instance, in the subsidies agreement in the WTO, we may have policy space there, but what has not been tested. And these are matters which we need to pay attention to. There's the whole issue of meaningful, special, and differential treatment, which means that, in essence, you give smaller states, developing countries, a little more latitude to implement the obligations than our larger counterparts would have. And we need to make sure that in the agreements which are crafted, we have that policy space to respond to our development needs and implement the mandates that we're called upon to implement. One of the major issues we need to tackle as well, graduation and access to financing. You would be amazed to know that even within these institutions such as the WTO, the whole matter of graduation even impacts how we can access some technical assistance which is available to the membership. And through the efforts at the international level, we are pushing to have those issues addressed to see how we can bring reform in those institutions. So just in closing, really, I want to say that, yes, reform is necessary. Yes, we need to be prepared for what reform would look like and why reform is being asked for. Is it, as the Director General Public Productive Sectors would have indicated, we have implementation issues which are unresolved, or is it because there are major players in the institutions who are not benefiting in the way that they would wish to benefit? But just to say the reform must result in an institution or institutions which benefit all participants in the process, and we have to be mindful that the issues of small states are not lost in the whole debate. Thank you.
Thank you, ministers and officers. Senior Minister, I want to give your ministry the opportunity to speak to the public a bit about UNCTAD. But before that, I just want to say how pleased it is. I don't think anyone in this Parliament could be more pleased about the restored very good relations between Barbados and our CARICOM sister countries, which had gone to an extreme low in the 10 years of the last decade, between 2008 and May 2018. You alluded to it earlier, where, I mean, Guyanese, and could be no relationship closer than between Barbadians and Guyanese. And it started because Barbadians went to Guyana to work in the sugar industry, where Guyanese were taken 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning by immigration officers on the instructions of a DLP administration that had no understanding whatsoever of the fact that Barbados benefited more from CARICOM than other CARICOM countries benefited from Barbados. And to see the arrangements that are now in place with Guyana, for example, on housing, on agriculture, with Suriname, with agriculture. I think Guyana, Antigua, on pharmaceutical reach, and the establishment of a pharmaceutical industry with our East African ancestral links, for example, is extremely pleasing. But UNCTAD, now Barbados is, through our Honourable Prime Minister, President of UNCTAD, I believe for a 2-year period. We had UNCTAD conference in Barbados, I think it was, October 2021, if I recall correctly. UNCTAD used to be a forceful institution in the 1970s. The late Jamaican Prime Minister Michael Manley was one of the persons in the newly developed countries pushing it. At that time, it was a group of 77, known as the Group of 77, in terms of trying to get better trade links for our small island, developing, newly independent countries with the developed world. And I just would like, this Parliament and the wider public, obviously, to know what we have been doing in terms of assisting the ordinary Barbadian now and getting the gains to come down through our foreign affairs links through UNCTAD within recent times.
Honourable Member, we have with us the National Coordinator for the outcome of UNCTAD 15. And I'm going to give the floor to him to speak to this question. I think that it is important to recognize that UNCTAD really would have responded to concerns, again, by the developing world, in much the same vein as your original question, the need for, or the felt need for there to be reform. The General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, which it then was, now the WTO, the World Bank, the IMF being considered to be unresponsive to the needs of developing countries, and that there needed to be more precise policy interventions that targeted some of developing country needs, for example, trade, transport, technology, access to financing, cultural cooperation. The truth of the matter is some of those things were felt back in the 70s, as you quite rightly point out, to be critical, and they still are. It takes no effort whatsoever to make a case that one of the challenges we have in this region is the absence of maritime transport or very little presence of maritime transport to enable us to move more efficiently the goods that we produce in this region to facilitate interregional trade and development of that nature. Similarly, despite all the effort that we are doing with Africa, the need will continue to exist for some time for us to be able to move goods across the Atlantic from, let us say, Barbados to the west coast of Ghana, for argument's sake. And we know that it is possible to do it because, unfortunately, 400 years ago, we were the cargo that was being, or our forefathers were the cargo that was being moved. It is now necessary to replace that with the opportunities for us to move the fruits of our commercial endeavor today, so that it is a very relevant and real consideration. And I, quite frankly, would welcome, I won't tell you what to ask me, but I would welcome an opportunity to speak to you a little bit more about that African relationship which we are trying to flesh out, because I think that that is also a substantial, groundbreaking initiative, especially that relationship in the context of our interface with the Africa-Exim Bank, which is in many ways unprecedented and can only bear wonderful good fruit for this region. But I will yield the floor to Mr. Carlos Wharton, who is the National Coordinator for the outcome of UNCTAD 15. Mr. Wharton.
Thank you, Minister. For the records, my name is Carlos Wharton, National Coordinator, resident in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, responsible for UNCTAD 15. A lot of what has been said is accurate with respect to the role of the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development. But for those listening who may not know, this institution is the only trade and development institution outside of the World Trade Organization that does research on trade and related issues for developing countries. It was established in the 1960s and has played a fundamental role in ensuring that certain key trade facilities, such as the generalized systems of preferences and so on, have been integrated into what is known as the multilateral trading system. When I joined the ministry for this assignment, Barbados was in the process of hosting what is known as UNCTAD 15, which is the 15th quadrennial session of the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development. And the two main outcome documents, the Bridgetown Covenant and the Spirit of Spicetown, sets the basis for the program of work that this institution will be undertaking over the next, between 2021 and 2024. For us here in Barbados, we are concerned not only primarily about Barbados' role as president of the conference and the Prime Minister's legacy in that regard, but we are also very concerned about ensuring that small and developing states got the maximum benefit during this quadrennium, since it was the first time that a small island developing state had been hosting the conference. So in that regard, some of the fundamental work we've been doing post-conference is working with, in first instance, the CARICOM Secretariat, and in the second and third instances, the Barbados Permanent Mission in Geneva, as well as the Bahamian Permanent Mission in Geneva, acting as their role as CARICOM coordinator in Geneva, to develop a SIDS framework. The purpose of this work was to develop a SIDS-related framework that was set out clearly the program of work that UNCTAD would undertake for SIDS, not only throughout this quadrennium, but beyond. And I'm pleased to report that the initial work done has led to a concept paper being approved by CARICOM senior officials late last year. This concept note has been received in Geneva and has been discussed by the SIDS group in Geneva. And the last we've heard is that the SIDS coordinator and the UNCTAD Secretary General had agreed on a way forward in terms of further consultations with the SIDS group and the building out of a SIDS program within the UNCTAD framework. This for us is fundamental if we are to guarantee that beyond the Bridgetown Covenant, that the institution has a distinct program that is targeted, that is transparent, and that meets the needs for the diverse group of small island developing states. To complement that work, we are also in consultations with the CARICOM Secretariat in deepening the institutional relationships between that Secretariat and the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development. We figure that, again, this type of memorandum of understanding, which currently doesn't exist, is critical if we are to lock in the long-term developmental benefits that we can gain from this institution, not just for Barbados, but for across the entire CARICOM space. Bringing it more closely to home, sir, one of the key issues Prime Minister Motley had requested during the conference was for the institution to pay very close attention to what was happening with inflation and supply chain management. And again, we are pleased to advise that the United Nations, that UNCTAD intends to host the first inaugural Global Supply Chain Forum here in Barbados in March 2024. And you would ask, why is that important? You would appreciate that COVID-19, the unfortunate events in Europe, in the war in Ukraine, and other bottlenecks caused due to a high demand for transportation and indeed for cargo, has led to significant bottlenecks in terms of our ability to access certain essential goods and goods in particular, but services also in some instances when talking about air transport. So for us, this Global Supply Chain Forum allows Barbados and other small island developing states to put on the table the key issues that they see are affecting their ability to trade, but more importantly, to get access to key essentials. Also on that agenda would be the whole issue of climate change and its impact on the transportation sector, the whole issue of decarbonization and its implications for access to shipping and other shipping-related, access to shipping-related activities. Thank you. So again, we are still in negotiation phase with UNCTAD. But informally, we have reached out to some country partners as well as international organizations, and they have all seemed willing to cooperate with us in this initiative. So we anticipate that all should go well for the hosting of this supply chain forum in March 2024. Another area that we've been working on is trying to convince the Secretariat to do more research on the impact of the international trading system and its rules on SIDS. And I think this was referenced earlier by my colleague, the Director of Foreign Trade. Lastly, we've been also assisting the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Investment, Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment on a project valued at around $500,000 US aimed at assisting Barbados with its economic diversification. And again, we are pleased to report that developments in this area are advancing smoothly, and we hope to receive a report from the UNCTAD Secretariat sometime between the third and fourth quarters of this year that will set out some of the key issues that Barbados has to tackle if it is to truly diversify its economy from what it currently, type of business it currently undertakes. So here again, we are talking about the importance of a modern new industrial policy for Barbados that speaks not just to traditional manufacturing, but other aspects along the value chain, and that would incorporate key areas for us like the life sciences sector, as well as the renewable energy sector, and others that are of interest to export Barbados and invest Barbados. Chair, I rest there, but if there are any other questions that you have, I'll be willing to come back. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Minister and officers. And Chairman, my final intervention under this head would be on the issue of the organization, African, Caribbean, Pacific States, its relationship with the European Union, and how that is relevant to our constituents here in Barbados. So, of course, I would have returned just 2 days ago from Brussels in representing Barbados in my capacity as representative to the assemblies, parliamentary assemblies there, OACPS, EU. And want to give Ministry, perhaps, the Honourable Member for St. James South and her officers the opportunity to speak towards the issue of the anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism financing. We know that it relates as well to the International Business Ministry, and obviously not only to Foreign Affairs Ministry, but the relevance, where are we at with that, the issue. We are now off of the list under the EU, but remain on an OECD list for some reason or another. We have tried to comply with everything which these developed countries require of us. The issue of beneficial ownership has been major, and we've reformed in that regard. As I understand it, an outstanding issue may very well be because we don't have enough successful prosecutions of people accused of money laundering. But obviously that doesn't make sense to me whatsoever, because under our system we have separation of powers, and a parliament or executive can tell a judiciary who it must find guilty. And after all, even if you find someone guilty at trial, they have a right of appeal, even to the CCJ. So if it could be explained to the public, the effects of this and the whole ramifications of it, and how it is so significant and important to not only our reputation as a country, which is a clean tax jurisdiction, but also in terms of our foreign exchange earnings. This was a sector which, if I recall, used to at one time earn about close to $1 billion a year in terms of foreign exchange, over 900 million, and significantly reduced now to a large extent because of what, in my opinion, is clearly unfairness by developed countries, which in fact encouraged us in the late 1970s to get into international business and international financial services. And if you could speak about the effect of that so that our constituents can see its importance to them, and also where we are at in terms of post-Cotonou agreement negotiations, and what is that about, and again, how that is of relevance to us as a country. The Cotonou agreement really having expired in 2020, but having been renewed now up to June this year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Honourable Member, I'm going to invite, especially with regard to the latter part of your question, the Director of Foreign Trade to speak to this, but also Minister Husbands as well.
With regards to the OACP, I'll just lay a little groundwork, and I would let the Director of Foreign Trade and certainly Acting Permanent Secretary, who represented us so well in those negotiations, share the outcomes and where we are. The OACP was a body created, the ACP was a body created simply to engage the EU in relation to development cooperation and assistance. So it was a convenient arrangement for them to engage us as one rather than separate individual countries, because there are about 77 of us. And what has happened latterly is that we have done a pivot where we recognize that our only concern in that engagement cannot be the interaction with the EU, but the interaction among ourselves, that as 77 countries, those are a lot of numbers, that there's trade to be had, there's technical cooperation between ourselves to be had, and then there's the advocacy that we can do as an international body with other major organizations and be able to leverage those votes. And so the agreement was made between the ACP to shift and become the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States. And this was in keeping with our pursuit of South-South trade, South-South engagement, and therefore what we have seen recently is a tremendous strengthening of the relationships between the entities and a greater advocacy for each other's issues. For example, at the OACP, when I represented Barbados with the EU and so on, Barbados was probably the only voice that spoke about blacklisting, as though it didn't matter to anybody else in the room. However, since the formation of the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, where we've pledged to support each other, at subsequent meetings, we have had the voices of all of our members supporting us on issues pertaining to blacklisting, to graduation, and so on. So there has been a shift. We've just completed the post-Cotonou agreement about 2 years ago, and we're now working through trying to get to a place where we are able to sign off on it and to be able to maximize the benefits from it. That is tremendous, and in response to the Honourable Corey Lane, what are the tangible benefits that we create? The signing of that post-Cotonou agreement coming into operation is going to make a good deal of difference to Barbados. I will ask the DPS Skinner to share, Acting Permanent Secretary Skinner to share concerning that, and then we'll ask the Director of Foreign Trade then to speak about where we are at the moment.
Thank you very much, Minister Husbands, and thank you, Honourable Member, for the questions related to the relationship between the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States and the European Union. Indeed, as indicated by Minister Husbands, negotiations for a new agreement between the two sides, OACPS and the European Union, concluded at the end of 2020, and the agreement was initialed in 2021 at the start. However, since then, there have been considerable issues related to Hungary, one of the EU member states, with respect to their own obligations being placed on them by the rest of the European Union in respect of their commitments to rule of law and other aspects. And in that context, I think that one member state has been leveraging its interest with the European Union and has used this agreement as one of the tools to delay its own commitments implementation. However, that has not stopped the two sides from engaging in cooperation that is beneficial to all parties. And in fact, the European Union adopted an amalgamation of its financial instruments under what is called NDICI, or Global Europe, to pursue development cooperation support with the countries of the world, all of their developing partners. And the Caribbean, and Barbados included, has been able to engage the European Union in this regard to benefit. And so even though the agreement, having been negotiated and initialed but not signed, appeared not to be implemented because it wasn't signed, is in fact still being implemented because it's used as the policy basis for the implementation of cooperation under the Global Europe. Not fully, however, and therefore we need to be a bit more robust and engage our Caribbean and Latin American counterparts to ensure that we can fully make use of the available resources under that relationship with the European Union. Of course, when it relates to our size within this relationship, we've been we've benefited significantly because of the policy arrangement within the OACPS that have supported a number of initiatives that we have put on the table, challenges that we've been facing in all fronts, including on climate vulnerability, which has led us to the Bridgetown Initiative. The OACPS has been very instrumental in supporting that, and so we know we've got a body of support, global support for the issues that may have been tabled by Barbados, but are of relevance and significance to the world at large, and particularly to all developing countries, whether coastal or they are landlocked. As the case may be for some countries, some developing countries. What we have also discovered from this process is that our voice can be heard in many quarters, and that we have strong leadership coming from the Caribbean and coming out of the OACPS, because we've been able to leverage partners from among from the body of the OACPS, and we've also been able to leverage some partners that are of the OECD ilk. And I think that this augurs well for us. It also means that the issues of small island developing states can be squarely placed on the table for discussion in all fora. And in fact, some places where we don't currently have membership and we don't currently have a voice does not mean that that would remain like that into the future. Surely, now that we have seen what we are capable of achieving when we put our minds to it and we work a bit harder, a lot can be achieved. And I think this is something that the rest of the world is now recognizing, not only at the state level, but at other levels, that the issues that are affecting small island developing states, other developing countries, whatever their sizes, can be considered, and we certainly together can make things happen. We can get action. We can have the rest of the world listen and take action in respect of our concerns. Thank you.
Could I ask the Director of Foreign Trade then to share the results of the post-Cotonou agreement in terms of the funding that is going to be available, the areas that they're going to support, so that members and the wider public can get an understanding of what are some of the achievements that we have been able to generate by working through this relationship with the EU and the post-Cotonou agreement.
Thank you very much. And just to indicate that as it relates to funding, the European Union has revamped its funding modalities, and it has put in place a methodology of geographicization, where they have put countries and regions together. The Caribbean region is linked with the Americas. The sum of 3.395 million euros has been allocated to that region. Out of that amount, 800 million has been allocated to the Caribbean region in a separate packet, but it must be stressed that that amount also includes funding under national indicative programs for countries. Those countries which would have national indicative programs are Belize, the Dominican Republic, Guyana, Haiti, Jamaica, Suriname. You would note that Barbados is not included in that list. So from the 800 million, a residual amount of 208 million is actually left available under the Caribbean Regional Multi-Annual Indicative Program. And of that amount, Partnership for Green Deals, 87 million euros has been allocated. Partnership on Economic Resilience and Trade, 78 million euros has been allocated. Partnership for Governance, Security and Human Development, 30 million euros has been allocated, and under the cooperation facilities, 13 million euro has been allocated. Now, it is important to add that 3 regional programs have already been adopted by the European Commission in 2021. Those were the Euroclima under the Partnership for Green Deals, the EU, Latin America and Caribbean LAC Digital Alliance under the Partnership for Economic Resilience, and the Trade and Trade and the Caribbean Cooperation Facility. Now, of the amounts identified above, these totals each include an amount for the European Fund for Sustainable Development, and that fund includes a blending of loans and grants and guarantees. And I can tell you that the region is positioning itself to take advantage of these amounts. At the national level, the ministry has been working with the Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment to have ready a body of project ideas which can be easily inserted into the process once we have the requisite information available. And we have also been working closely with the European Union delegation in Barbados. We've been maintaining close dialogue. We've also been working with the Honourable Chantal Monroe-Knight relative to making sure that we have a matrix of projects. And working with the EU has indicated that, in essence, we bring the concepts to them and they would see what available resources are at the ready. But nonetheless, the ministry will be doing its research and consult with our other stakeholder ministries to make sure that we have sufficient information available to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to emphasize what would have been said earlier, in terms of the South-South, if you look at how the EU has partitioned the funding out of the post-Cotonou, where the Caribbean is put in with Latin America, you will then see why the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade will be giving even greater attention to the relationships with Latin America so that we can develop some joint projects that we can take advantage of some of that programming and be able to get some of the vital things that we need for Barbados. And in addition, Africa being a part of the ACP, they themselves are going to be receiving, I think it's between $24 to $25 billion for the countries in Africa. And therefore, our relationship that we have started building with Africa is something then that we can all grow as a result of being part of that post-Cotonou and do some collaboration as well. Minister?
I don't know that I have anything else that I would wish to add to your question, Honourable Member. You had wanted to speak to, you hadn't asked the question. I suggested that I could elaborate by way of our relationship with Africa, but I don't want to go there if you haven't gone.
If Chairman gives me that follow-up in terms of Africa, yeah, I mean, the OACPS includes Africa, and Senior Minister, if you wish the opportunity to expand on, of course, the relations we have been developing with our African brothers over the last, 3 years?
No, I would simply just say this, Honourable Member. I think that there is tremendous opportunity that now awaits us as we deepen this relationship which we've forged with Barbados, first of all, and by extension CARICOM with Africa. Obviously, it began at a people-to-people, leader-to-leader level, and we in Barbados have seen visits in the life of this administration which were unprecedented. The President of Ghana, the President of Kenya, President of Rwanda. But beyond that, we have recently had the advantage of the Africa Exim Bank coming in the personage of its head, its president, President Orama, to participate for the first time ever in a CARICOM Heads of Government conference, which they did in Bahamas last month, and to make very substantial commitments towards deepening their relationship with CARICOM. In fact, creating, again, for the first time, a platform which is aimed at the process of developing trade on a South-South basis with an entity that is very competent and capable to not only just engage, but to deliver substantial funding assistance. On the table right now, if all of the CARICOM member states sign on, would be a commitment towards $3 billion United States dollars in funding. And as it now stands, there's a guarantee of $1.5 billion. Not the type of money in terms of development funding that is being discussed anywhere else with respect to this region. And it is vitally important, in my judgment, that we now see this as an opportunity to do some of the things that many of you, of our colleagues here today have talked about. I used the example just now when I first started to respond on the question of UNCTAD about the challenge that we do have with respect to moving goods. And in real terms, there must be a shipping line. That has always been a clear understanding, but there's never been any capacity to finance it. So that is, for example, one major type of project that has to happen. Above and beyond that, there's obviously the need to build the air bridge between ourselves and the African continent. And that is, we've already had this type of discussion when the tourism ministry was here in the well, and there are discussions going on with at least 3 entities out of Africa right now between Barbados and that continent. So I simply say that it is an opportunity which has presented itself and which is really going to be concretized by virtue of the fact that the Africa Exim Bank will have its Caribbean headquarters right here in Barbados. So that was the observation I wanted to make.
I thank you, Senior Minister, and officers, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for Christchurch East.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister Simmons, you had indicated that when you, as a neophyte minister, were involved in trade, CARICOM represented half.
I think the word I used was novitiate.
I stand corrected. Let the record reflect what the minister said. But you had indicated that the trade with CARICOM represented 50% of our trade capacity, and that now it is 60-something%. So given the importance of CARICOM to trade, what initiatives are there now to encourage, further develop, incentivize regional trade in that area?
Well, okay, first of all, the last year's figure would have suggested that 60% of our trade, total exports, goes to the CARICOM area. I think that in some measure, Mr. Chairman, we may have tread on this ground earlier, because part of what we wish to do, obviously, is to deepen the relationship with certain key entities within CARICOM. Obviously, the question of Guyana and Suriname becomes a critical part of that discussion. With respect to our exports, again, when Minister Colin Jordan would have raised the question about movement of people, I think that in a sense it also speaks to this issue. We do a large amount of our work via our business, via the movement of services and not so much goods. Yes, we want to increase the amount of goods that we sell into the region, but let me speak a little bit first of all to the question of moving services. There are a number of, in fact, you know what, I'm going to use this approach to it. We have, in my judgment, to take very seriously the opportunities that present themselves for us to better sell our services, not only into CARICOM, but, Honourable Member, quite frankly, into the wider world. CARICOM is perhaps the starting ground. Perhaps you might wish to see it, for want of a better way of putting it, as the practice wicket. We have a revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which creates a set of rules and regulations within which we will trade in services, and which we do follow. But we must now be able to take those same services that we sell, whatsoever those services are. In your case and in mine, it could be legal services. In other cases, there's a whole range. There's ground transportation. We are doing home porting in Barbados. We do efficiently, at world-class level, a business via ground transportation that is not replicated anywhere else in the Eastern Caribbean. We take passengers who arrive here on a wide-bodied aircraft. We create an artificial bubble by having large tour buses meeting them at the foot of the aircraft. We transport them down to Bridgetown, where they are processed and placed on a cruise ship, and the reverse is done on the way back up. That type of facility is a service strength that can be sold not only into other places of the Caribbean, but equally can be sold outside of the Caribbean, outside of CARICOM. I need not tell you, Honourable Member, about the skill sets of the professions, because you are part of the professional class in Barbados, and you will know whether it is engineering, law, medicine, etc. There's a range of professionals who leave this country on a week-by-week basis and go to sell their services across the Eastern Caribbean. And again, we have to so manipulate trade relationships that we allow for those services to be sold beyond the borders of CARICOM. Culturally, we were able to define in an economic partnership agreement the ability to move, or our cultural practitioners to move and sell their services into Europe. That we have not put the kind of muscular tissue behind that opportunity is no fault of our cultural practitioners. It, quite frankly, is a failing that we have to confront as a country. I know that this administration, the prior Barbados Labour Party administration would have been in office when the Economic Partnership Agreement was concluded. I was party to the conclusion of the negotiation. There was a dearth of activity that took place between then and now. So much so that certain things that should even have been assisting, if I go back to the example of our professions, assisting our professionals to be able to move their services did not happen, but they were fundamental. So I speak, for example, to the recognition, mutual recognition of agreements, so that you can recognize the institutions that you were trained at and be accredited as part of the trading process. Those mutual recognition agreements, which would say, for example, that we recognize that you are trained in engineering at a certain school, and this meets the standard that we want to have met for you to sell your services into Europe, or that you were trained in a certain school when it comes to law, etc. You want to sell your services. Those things we have not done. Truth be told, we didn't even do it amongst ourselves as yet. And this is really the painful lesson of missed opportunity, Mr. Chairman. So that the Honourable Member to whom I am responding, and myself, are members of the legal profession. CARICOM would see, as of right, members of the legal profession within CARICOM moving freely between CARICOM member states, subject to accreditation. But there is not a single lawyer in Barbados who has been accredited in Suriname, to the best of my knowledge, information, and belief, and I suspect vice versa. So that if we have failed to do these things amongst ourselves, it is not likely that we're going to be able to break in to the Dutch Antilles to do business, nor is it likely that we'll be able to break into the Kingdom of the Netherlands to do business. And those are the ways in which the services sector, traditional services sector, has been failed. I think we must also not just see ourselves as we are now, but what are the services that we want to move tomorrow. Web design, applications design, software. Those are things that all of our young people are now not grappling with, but living. And we must be in a position to make sure that our trade agreements enable those young people in particular, all in young, but enable those people in particular with that type of interest to be able to penetrate new markets. Now, if I could speak even more candidly about some of the concerns that I have. At the heads meeting in the Bahamas, we had the opportunity to interface with Prime Minister Trudeau. And Prime Minister Trudeau would have been requested by some of the heads, and I think very well-intentioned heads of government, to allow for there to be easier access to the Canadian market by way of the granting of visas, et cetera, et cetera. And while there is room for that type of discussion, the truth of the matter is that we now have to be willing as a region, and I suspect this region is got to be led by some country, and I see no reason why it cannot be Barbados, quite frankly, to say that the time has come when we have to be more robust in the type of trade relationship that we want with major trading partners, specifically Canada and the United States of America. In the case of Canada, our trade relationship is rooted in an agreement, an arrangement, called CARICOM, which came into force in 1986. It is an arrangement which is rooted on preferential treatment being given to Barbados and the English-speaking Caribbean, non-reciprocal access to their market. So we don't reciprocate. They would take what we have, and they determine what they're going to take from us. So that there may be some textiles, there may be some, the basic commodities. But nowhere in that arrangement is there services. So that all of those categories that I just spoke to you about, Honourable Member, ground transportation, expertise at world-class level that we've built out in this country, not one of them can function in Canada. The professionals, Mr. Chairman, same challenges would confront them. The web design, application, creation, software, et cetera, we have world-class health workers in Barbados, same challenge would confront them. And you can go on and on. So that if you're going to seriously look at the relationship we have with Canada in terms of services, which is supposed to be our area of strength, then we need to be seriously looking at how best we can redesign not the arrangement we have with Canada. And it is an arrangement in which the Prime Minister of Canada will determine whether he goes to the WTO and asks for a waiver in order for it to continue, rather than what we need to have, which is to say an agreement rooted in law, which says that these are the terms of the trade agreement, and these are the terms in which we access Canada's market with the following types of services and or goods. And I would go further. It has to be sufficiently mature that it takes into account the imbalance in terms of size and capacity to trade in the same way that we have been able to do that with the Economic Partnership Agreement in Europe, so that there was, with Europe, an asymmetrical market access that allowed for us to get our goods and services into Europe if we had cared to capitalize on it, which we failed to do, but get our goods and services into Europe without them having the same degree of access immediately. And then after a period of time during which our people would have had a chance to grow, become more competitive, become more familiar with the nuances of the marketplace, and therefore be able to stand on their own 2 feet over there, then there would have been the inward flow of goods coming from Europe. We have, sir, failed to do that between 2008 and 2023. It is a burning, crying shame. And the reality is that if we are not careful, we will replicate that failure. And it is my judgment that it is not only true of Canada, it is also true, sir, of the United States of America, where we have a similar arrangement called the Caribbean Basin Initiative. And in that Caribbean Basin Initiative, again, preferential, non-reciprocal arrangement handed to us or gifted to us by President Reagan. The Congress of the United States would have approved it in 1986, I believe. Reagan would have committed to it in 1984. But we are talking about preferential access of duty-free goods, and it has been a very limited value. It needs now to be reassessed and again taken into consideration those areas which are areas of strength for us, and among those areas of strength must be a serious conversation on the services sector in Barbados, because we, as you well know, Honourable Member, are spending millions of dollars training our people to become top-line graduates of university in a number of areas, whether it be health, whether it be education, whether it be the professions, you name it. But they are not able to access, as of right, the United States market or the Canadian market in order to sell those things that those skills that they possess. And for each one of them who are unable to do that, we are bereft or we are losing opportunities for foreign exchange. In the case of Canada, I had a chance to have to look at it the other day. Canada's sale of services into Canada by the United States of America was over 60 billion, with a B, United States dollars last year. And there's really no reason why we should not be competing in that space. I would agree that we're not going to be able to compete with all the services that the United States may sell. But the fact of the matter is, if we are seriously interested in building out skill sets in Barbados, and we obviously are because we invest heavily in it financially, we must then, in terms of training, we must then find markets for those people who are trained to be able to bring returns to the country. That's just my view. And I feel that I should give the opportunity for the Director of Trade and the Director General of the Productive Sector to share their thoughts, if any.
Certainly, thank you, Minister. I would just want to add that CARICOM itself has recognized that there's a need certainly to undertake some deepening between its members. Overall, about 17% of trade within CARICOM is actually inter-regional trade. We import most of our goods from outside of the region, so there certainly is a need to substantially increase trade within the region. And there are a number of initiatives going on at the moment. I believe Minister Husbands would have spoken before about SimSupro. That is one of the initiatives which hopefully, if it is utilized fully by all importers and exporters, we should certainly see an increase in goods being traded within the region. But there's also at the technical level work going on in terms of the revising the common external tariff. And the purpose of that is certainly to ensure that regional goods are protected within the common market while ensuring that consumers do not pay excessively high duty on goods which are not produced here. But that as well will certainly see an increase, or is intended to get an increase in trade within the region. I should also add that there's also the rules of origin criteria that is being revised as well, and that is to deepen the type of production which we have within the region and to ensure that there's higher value added, because the higher the value, certainly the more benefit it will be for the region, more profits for regional businesses. So I think that those three initiatives I wanted to highlight at this stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I would just expand a little more on some of the initiatives which the Director General has identified, as well as some of the other initiatives in place relative to increasing trade and improving the regulatory framework within CARICOM. Most of these discussions take place within the Council for Trade and Economic Development. So SimSupro, or the CARICOM Integrated Marketplace and Suspension Procedure, that is a website which has been created, I believe, by the Republic of Suriname. It has been handed over to CARICOM. It was officially launched last year in September. And it's a medium whereby all producers in CARICOM can upload details of the products which they produce. It is a framework to bolster intra-regional trade, but it's a public site, so it's also available to persons from outside of CARICOM as well. And the onus really is for every single member state in CARICOM to populate the website with the information on the producers so that they can take advantage of the opportunities there. As it relates to the CET and the rules of origin, yes, the Director General would have spoken to that issue, and we need to have a common external tariff in place. And this tariff is applicable to third states, and it also applies in instances where goods produced in CARICOM do not meet the agreed rules of production. So as he indicated, you would get the requisite protection, and it's also intended to help bolster trade and production, innovation, investment, and revenue when you need. Once you put it in the right spot, that will be done. As it relates to the regulatory framework, work is being completed on the rules and regulations for the mergers and acquisitions regime. We recognize as it relates to competition policy, we need an effective framework in place, and rules and regulations therefore are pivotal, and I'm pleased to say that Barbados has been leading the charge in this area. I believe the Fair Trading Commission has been chairing this process on behalf of the region. Also, as it relates to public procurement, the regional market is untapped as it relates to public procurement. There are public procurement portals which each member state in CARICOM is supposed to have. Those portals, I believe, were created with funding which was made available by the European Union. And through these portals, each country is supposed to upload those procurement opportunities so that there is transparency and information is made available to all CARICOM member states to access those opportunities for trade, especially as it relates to small businesses. It provides opportunities for collaborations in order to meet those procurement requirements. So Barbados would have signed the procurement protocol, I believe, in 2019, but the regulations and the rules have to be finalized. There's also the Trade in Animal and Animal Products Protocol. It was very interesting to note that meat comes into the region from as far, I believe, as New Zealand and Australia, and the appropriate framework was not in place in CARICOM to allow our members to trade chicken between Barbados and Guyana or St. Lucia. So that process too is being finalized. You would have heard earlier this morning about the 25 by 25 program, which is being pushed by the CARICOM private sector organization. That organization brings together a wide cross-section of the private sector, and they also are the main interface with the CARICOM bodies as it relates to the private sector interests. Now, that program is intended to reduce the volume of value-added imports as it relates to agro-processed foods into the region by 25% by 2025. And it must be made clear that under this arrangement, the region is not planning to ban the imports of any commodities from any countries. The regional market is big enough for sufficient players from within and outside to participate. And through this framework, we're looking to encourage investment from within, from outside, create opportunities for value-added production. This would, of course, lend itself to increased employment and revenue generation within the region. A similar path is being taken as it relates to industrial goods. We're now in the initial stages. We've managed to identify a couple products where studies are being done. There are about 3 products. One is more value-added industrial, but work is continuing, and we're looking to see for these products how we can increase production security for businesses in the region. And the last point I would wish to mention at this time right now would be an initiative by the ministry where Honourable Minister Husbands would have initiated a process of informal consultations with her colleagues in CARICOM with a view to move the CARICOM agenda forward, regional integration, creating real opportunities for increased trade amongst member states bilaterally. And I'm pleased to report that it is a lead up from a process where we've been meeting with subsets, but I believe in September last year, Minister, we would have had an informal meeting which was chaired by St. Kitts and Nevis, and the results of that meeting will be coming to a special meeting of the Council for Trade and Economic Development, I believe, on the 8th of March this week. So those are just a few of the initiatives which are being rolled out by the Council for Trade and Economic Development. Senior Minister would have mentioned already the issues related to shipping. There's the issues related to scale, and COVID-19 showed us that within the region, we really needed to increase our efforts as it relates to production and food and nutritional security. And we hope that through increased opportunities for trade in the region, scale can be ramped up, and this can redound itself to reduce costs of goods in the region. And with increased trade, you may find that the shipping issue may be resolved to some extent, but we are keeping our fingers crossed. I rest. Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions.
Sorry, I was just going to say that in order for those initiatives to work, it is necessary now to work with your enterprises to get them to think and operate export-oriented, help them to build capacity so that they're able to take on those markets, because I believe it is the way in which we're going to build regional enterprises that have some scale that will give us capacity then to take on Africa or to take on Latin America. So you also have to have on the other side the preparation and capacity building of your enterprises to take advantage of what are the opportunities we're presenting. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Minister, I strongly believe in the adage, if you don't leave home, nothing will happen to you. And I think that if I were to summarize the purpose of the ministry in as normal a way as I could, it would be that. It would be that a country the size of Barbados, that I dare say for the decade before 2018 had lost quite a bit of its global gravitas, does really need to invest in having a presence and having conversations with our partners. Now, I'm going to start with a very specific question, a very specific issue for the people that that we all represent. I imagine that in many ways, your brief, the brief of this ministry, must be driven by the needs of the people that we serve in Barbados, so that it is not about some lofty international agenda, but it is about what do Barbadians need. And in that regard, I have a very particular concern. I look through your estimates and I see that there are overseas missions, funded overseas missions in Venezuela, a funded overseas mission in United Arab Emirates. And in your opening, Minister, you talked about increased and enhanced partnership with Saudi Arabia. Now, as you may be aware, and I definitely know that the Minister of State in the ministry is very aware, the Hajj pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Every adult Muslim must undertake this pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in his or her adult life. And I frame the importance of that to let you understand that perhaps if you were talking about Christianity or another faith, you might say that you are really talking about the matter of a man or a woman's salvation. And I don't think that as a government we want to play with that idea. So Barbadian Muslims being able to make the journey to Saudi Arabia at least once in their adult life is one of the things they must do as a practicing Muslim. Now, there's been an issue with the availability of visas to Barbadian Muslims to be able to make this pilgrimage. And it is not, I raise it here to have an opportunity to ventilate the issue. I do not consider it an administrative matter, and I do not consider it minutiae. I consider it something that occupies the attention and the anxiety of many of the Barbadians that we represent. Now, it seems the rest of the world is able to do this online, or at least many countries are. I believe that there was an attempt by several Barbadians to do it online, and it was not successful. And the reason I raise the issue of the overseas mission in Venezuela is that I believe that it means that there still needs to be travel to Caracas to be able to undertake the process. Now, we know that because of recent events, being able to engage with Caracas for these kinds of issues is also not as straightforward as one would think. I want to hear from you, bearing in mind that when we engage with other countries, we have to bring to them the things that occupy our citizenry. I had raised this matter in previous discussions when we were engaging Saudi Arabia on other matters. And I do not think we have been able to get it resolved. The last season of Hajj, I believe, was the one in which no Barbadian was able to make the pilgrimage. And this is serious for the Muslim population. So I wanted to ask you more broadly, what do we foresee as the cooperation with Saudi Arabia, and whether there is space to ensure that this accommodation, where we have direct access to those visas, is a part of that relationship?
Well, Honourable Member, I want to say to you, first of all, that I'm in philosophical alignment with you on the importance of the matter you're raising. The specifics of the circumstances were not known to me personally, but I am in philosophical alignment with you on the matter. I think it would be more accurate to say that I couched my opening remarks more broadly than just Saudi Arabia, because beyond the kingdom, what we are really seeking is an enhanced partnership with all of the Gulf states. But out of an abundance of deference to the specific nature of your question, I'm going to invite P.S. Rudder to respond to the material particulars which are confronting.
Thank you, Minister. I shall do my best. Yes, this has been a problem, sourcing visas for Barbadian nationals wishing to go to the pilgrimage has been an ongoing problem for which we have continuously made representation. There are, of course, as you would know, Honourable Representative, several countries with which Barbados has visa abolition agreements of different types, and this would have been an approach that we would have attempted to make also in this regard, if only specific to this holy time. The success has not been achieved. I was told, though, a little earlier this year by one of the leaders in the Muslim community here in Barbados that some accommodation had been reached. But the specifics of that I am not able, because I didn't receive all the information to share here today. But it's something that Barbados, as a government, the ministry, as a ministry representing the interests of our nationals, that we will continue to pursue until we can have a sustainable solution to it, and not a sort of patch and fix for 1 year or another.
I would only want to add, Minister, because I I recognize that you've obviously pointed to a deficiency, and I want to thank you for doing that. A few days ago, it was drawn to my attention by two ladies who were going on a cruise in Africa. They were flying to Africa to do a cruise, and they were going to stop. It's a 3-week cruise, stopping at about 17 different ports in Africa. And they were making the point to me that even though we have gone through this exercise of waiving the visa requirements, that the reciprocal waiver has not in all circumstances been done, which in turn makes it difficult for them because in 1 or 2 stops they will not be able to get off of the ship because that has not been fixed. So it throws light, as your question has done, on some of the deficiencies. And I would simply say this: we are obviously going through a transformative period. This type of approach to these countries has not been done in the past, and there will be areas where the ball has been fumbled. I want to face it frankly and pledge that we will do our best to fix it, because I do understand the point you're making. It is a very material concern.
Thank you very much, Minister. If I may try and point in a particular direction on that matter, I think that one is likely to have some success with the online portal. There are countries that have access. I see no reason why Barbadian nationals could not similarly be one of the countries that is able to simply go online and access a visa. Of course, this is your wheelhouse more than mine, so there may be considerations that I'm not aware of, but it may be worth looking into. On my second question, I thank you for the commitment to address it. My second question, I want to return to something that has been fairly ventilated in our discussions so far, but I want to focus on one particular approach to or function of CARICOM. We've spoken about free movement. We've spoken about generally what is on the CARICOM agenda. But it seems to me that, and there are many young people who raise the issue of the role of CARICOM and its usefulness in a future Barbados and in a future Caribbean, is something that is interestingly on the lips, on the minds of many young people, as we think about what should Barbados' integration into the world continue to look like. I've always thought, having worked myself in the Caribbean single market and economy, and having very much enjoyed doing so, I've always thought that the effort of those who work within the organs of CARICOM seems not to match the output. There's a tremendous amount of effort that goes into a lot of the work that goes on within the institution, and there's a tremendous amount of talent within the organs of the institution. But I feel as if when I compare, for example, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and how real that cooperation is for the experience of citizens every day, that perhaps CARICOM does have a ways to go. And I wanted to ask you in particular about the role of functional cooperation. That thing that we do where we work together for a common outcome or common operations in 1 or 2 or 3 areas. And I've long thought that CARICOM needs to choose what those are. And if we have 4 or 5 countries who are willing to come together and make that functional cooperation happen, then we should do that. We've had lots of conversations, Minister, throughout these estimates, and we'll continue to have, about the question of laboratories for sanitary and phytosanitary analysis and so on, about the issue of data analytics and cybersecurity, the issue of health and medical diagnostics and the extent to which we don't have a population size that would call for us to have all of these different types of equipment, because in a population our size, the cost benefit of having maybe 10 people in the population or 100 people in the population using this equipment would not bring us economies of scale. We have talked throughout these estimates about the issue of pharmaceutical procurement as well. And the fact that the Eastern Caribbean has managed to perfect something that perhaps the wider CARICOM has not properly turned its attention to, certainly on the issue of data. I used to be a part of a group called the Living Standard Measurement Committee for the Eastern Caribbean. And what was that? It was a group of us, statisticians, economists, and others, who got together and said, listen, we don't have the wherewithal to be continuously doing poverty studies that cost $200,000 a pop. Let's come together and decide that we are going to have this kind of standard schedule of surveys that we do throughout the Eastern Caribbean that allows us to know some of the particulars of how people are living and share that information and be able to compare that information across countries. Functional cooperation, for me, is where CARICOM can distinguish itself and be of use to citizens of this region by coming together to look at procuring pharmaceuticals, medical diagnostics, data, cybersecurity, and so on. What is the agenda? What are the targets for making functional cooperation real in CARICOM, and how do we expect that that will benefit Barbadians?
Before you get an answer from me on this particular question, I do believe that P.S. Rudder wanted to circle back to your previous question to just add something else. P.S.
Thank you, Senior Minister Simmons. You moved so quickly, Ms. Cadell, that I just wanted really to reiterate that it's the recognition of your frustration and that of the which is obviously you're representing the concerns of the Muslim community in Barbados about the fact that we cannot get visas or the same access to other countries. I just want to emphasize that this is, Barbados, the ministry will continue to make the representation. At the end of the day, it is a sovereign decision by the Saudi government, just as Barbados makes a decision that we don't provide visa-free access to many countries. We've expanded the group, but we don't do it for everyone. And just the same way that Barbados gets visas for certain is visa-free for certain countries, while others have to apply and be granted or not. But the real point I want to make is that often this comes from a strength of relationship and an understanding of the sharing of the needs between the two countries. And Barbados is working to build its relationship with Saudi Arabia. This is part of the non-traditional areas where we have expanded externally in our external engagement. We're focusing on a lot of matters of technical cooperation, funding, finance, air services, you name it. I feel that the growth of the relationship, the strength of the relationship should lead into that area also. And certainly we'll work to make it happen.
Thank you for coming back on that. Minister, before you answer the second question, I just want to clarify that for years, Muslim Barbadians have been traveling to Saudi Arabia for Hajj. So this is not a new ask. This is something that has been interrupted. And I believe that it was last year that was the first time that no Barbadian was able to travel. So just to clarify for those who may be listening, that we're not asking for a new visa arrangement. I think we're asking for the operational process to be more accessible, because you will understand that it is more difficult for people to have to themselves travel to Venezuela to be able to have this process completed. And to the extent that there is an online facility in place now, I am making the request frontally that we explore Barbados being added as one of the countries that can have access to that online approach. You know, when the minister who is now responsible for investment was having conversations with the delegation from Saudi Arabia in the area of tourism and other areas of cooperation, I said to him, quite frankly, that we have to be able to represent the concerns of Barbadians today. We have to be able to make representation for the things that they are asking of us today. I know that sometimes we feel that we are negotiating these kind of lofty matters, but I would not want to see us come away from the negotiating table or the partnership table without also impressing upon our interlocutors that there are things that we need and we are asking. We are a sovereign nation with the right to be able to express the needs of our country and the people who live here. And I would simply ask that we live by that principle. Thank you.
Minister, if I could now, because as I said, I am entirely aligned with you philosophically on the issue, and we will have to look at this internally. If I could go to the second question, and let me start by responding there on the basis again of how I feel. And I think you know where I stand on the question of CARICOM and its usefulness. I believe that a strong CARICOM, and I think I made this case already today, a strong CARICOM is absolutely important for Barbados's economic and commercial well-being. I do not know of any economic precedent to be found anywhere else in the world where you have 60% of more of your trade being reliant on that one particular geographical area, and you do not do all within your power to sustain that geographical area and make it stronger, because it is almost like your lifeblood that you are speaking about. Now, where are we? As a small island, 166 square miles, 300,000 odd people, we just cannot do it alone. And so therefore there has to be a deepening of relationship, and CARICOM perhaps is the first point and the easiest point within which we can build these, use the fancy language, multilateral relationships. But what we're talking about is to build a relationship that works for the people of Barbados, your constituents and mine. When you're confronted with shortages of key products, as we have been during the course of all of last year as a result of the Kremlin's war, we had to find assistance from the relationship which we drew from CARICOM and wider Caribbean. Food and production insecurity, again, we drew our support from CARICOM. There are serious issues which this country has had to contend with throughout time and still contending with. And I don't want to say serious issues and then in the same breath necessarily use the example of security, but that quite frankly comes to my mind. And we all know that from time to time we have had to find partnerships with CARICOM neighbors on matters of security and vice versa. So that I start by saying that for me, a strong CARICOM is an indispensable proposition. I then turn to your question of functional cooperation. I think it is important to recognize that there are very limited resources in this region. I think you made that point. And sometimes it is distinctly unhelpful to have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 12, 14 countries trying to replicate the same endeavor, because many of us are in a state of financial contingency, and it would be best to merge our efforts. In fact, it probably would be a most desirable practice. And I can give you an example of where I am increasingly coming to the conclusion that we probably should look at the region as opposed to just ourselves. I used to be minister responsible directly for the operation of the Fair Trade Commission. The Fair Trade Commission is now confronted with unprecedented levels of responsibility for an emerging energy sector, which, though we know it had to happen, clearly the level, and you are familiar with this, the level of demand placed now to create a new regulatory framework for wind energy, for photovoltaic energy, even as we do this and try to build out this regulatory framework, all the other business of the Fair Trade Commission has to be done, and the expertise required to deal with these intensely complicated and specialist areas is not easily forthcoming. So that to say that Barbados has one and then expect St. Lucia to have one and Dominica to have one, et cetera, may not be the best thing for the region. The other point is that, quite frankly, you do not get for those people who have to function as regulators, they do not get the best scale of experience if you're only looking at what happens within one small destination of 166 square miles. You need to have a wider cross-section of experience to bring out the best of you, and I think that is true. Certainly it is true of the practice of law. The more experience you get as a lawyer, the better you should become. The more experience you get as a doctor, the better and more competent you should become. And that is one of the realities that we have to confront. So that there are clearly some areas where I think you're quite right. There should be an approach where the collective is dealing with any one particular task, and it may be satisfactory also for financial reasons which are very obvious, because if we pool together to achieve whatever that task is, and whatever discipline it might be, then probably we are going to put less strain on all of our budgets, which, as I started by saying, are substantially strained already. CARICOM has, prior to my becoming foreign minister, and I'm trying to remember now, for the life of me, I can't remember the date, but it would have been within the last 2 or 3 years, CARICOM came to a position where at the heads of government they agreed that I believe if 4 or 5 member states are prepared to embark on a particular venture, then they can go ahead and do this. And when and if others are able to catch up or to step on board, then that can happen. Now, there were some built-in, that was an important point, because there are some built-in impediments in our system, and we bring this on ourselves. I am going to speak guardedly here now, because I'm speaking about what heads of government have done and are doing, and I do not wish to be interpreted as flying in the face of the heads. But the truth of the matter is, I think we can all agree that it is easier and I use your example of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, it is easier for them to move as one because structurally they are perhaps more alike and more automatically aligned than CARICOM is as a broader collective. In CARICOM, we have the issues of the lesser developed countries, so-called, and the more developed countries, and how you strike a balance between the pace at which the lesser developed can move and the pace at which the more developed can move, et cetera, et cetera. So that I throw that out there as perhaps an example of why it is that those things that you correctly point to are taking place. I also feel that inherently in the structure of CARICOM, there has been a practice where all must agree for anything to happen. And now that we've started to break away from that, it will allow for greater impetus in progressing towards new ideas and new initiatives. And I do think it has been an impediment to our progress, because we have traditionally had to say we wait on all 14 to come to the table before we can go forward. There's a lot of discussion that can turn on this particular matter. And again, because it is really not within my domain, quite frankly, not even within Barbados's domain alone, but it has to be at the level of the heads and a plurality of the heads for us to be able to speak to changes with respect to how we treat the functional cooperation. I would want to invite Senior Foreign Service Officer Sandra Gittins to share her thoughts on this, because she has, as you are aware, been deeply involved in the CARICOM process and would be very au fait with some of the challenges which have been raised on this matter before.
Thank you, Senior Minister. Just to say that the heads have agreed, and you correctly stated that they took the decision that where 4 or 5 CARICOM member states are ready to move forward, they signed what is called the Enhanced Cooperation Protocol to do so. are several areas in which the heads are seeking to address. And Prime Minister Motley, as the lead head for the CARICOM Single Market and the Economy, recently wrote to her colleagues to point out some of the areas of action that are priority areas that are outstanding. And these areas all help in terms of functional cooperation. There is the agricultural, sanitary, and photosanitary matters. There's the authorization of the multilateral air services agreement. We all know that there's an issue of transportation within the region. There's the protocol on contingent rights that also needs to be operationalized. With respect to the free movement of persons, there must be the need for member states to agree to the categories and to put that into their internal institutional practices. There is the mutual recognition of companies. We spoke earlier about the common external tariff when we spoke about the issues of trade. So it's completing the common external tariff review. There's also the updating and the further developing of the CARICOM Single Market Application Process System and the online company registry labor market information system. So these are steps in which the heads are taking to ensure harmonization and cooperation among the member states. I also want to mention that later this month, I think it's between the 21st and the 24th of March, we are actually going to have here in Barbados a symposium with the CARICOM regional institutions. One of the mandate of the heads is the need to review the CARICOM institutions and see how are they fit for purpose at this moment in terms of advancing the regional integration project. So the ministry is currently working to organize and to set up that symposium with a consultant, and we also will be calling upon ministries to participate in that. There's also a whole review of the governance system of CARICOM. How best are we meeting the needs of the region, of our citizens within, and to look at what the structures are in terms of the decision-making practices and policies. We know that we leave at the end of a meeting. How are we implementing what were the outcomes of the decisions taken by the heads of government? So, Minister, you are, Member of Parliament, you are correct. The area of functional cooperation is important. During the COVID period, we saw how important that was, where we were able as a region to deal with the matters that came to fore, and without having the CARFA, which is a CARICOM institution, we would not have been able to procure some of the vaccines that we were able to do so for our citizens, and that is throughout the region. We also, I must say, we had to rely on one of our member states, St. Lucia, because of the pharmaceutical arrangements they have with Martinique, where we were able to tap into them to make and put on their schedule to ask for vaccines for Barbados. These are things that are happening which persons may not be aware of, but without the collaboration among our member states, we will not be able to do many things and to advance many things for our citizens. And I would just like to end by saying that the fact that we have 7 members within CARICOM who are able to collaborate strengthens the regional integration project, and it also makes it deepens it, and therefore we do not consider the fact that they may be able to move forward on their own or because of the status that they may be as something that is a hindrance, but rather adding to the widening and the deepening of the CARICOM project. Thank you.
The only thing I would want to add, Honourable Member, is that perhaps the missing piece of this puzzle that you have quite interestingly pointed us to is the question of how we are going to treat the sovereignty. And I think that, again, CARICOM has chosen to do things in perhaps one of the most difficult ways in terms of bringing an integration effort together and to move it forward. Obviously, there's not a lot of appetite in many parts of the CARICOM community to loss of sovereignty. But the reality is that if we look at the example you gave us with the OECS, their capacity to come together, for example, and have one central bank, one common currency, and therefore the fiscal policy that must go with that and so on, which must underpin those types of arrangements. Those are conversations which have to be had at a wider level in CARICOM if we are going to see the kind of similarity between CARICOM as it now exists and the OECS as it now functions. I think that is a journey that we still have to go on. It's a conversation, as I said, that a lot of people are not going to be happy to have because many of us prefer to be in complete control of a very small pot as opposed to sharing in something far larger. But again, that is the complexity of the situation. And I believe that, again, this is really a matter that is at a pay grade higher, certainly than mine.
Thank you. My final question.
I would just want to add, however, when it comes to emergencies, functional cooperation happens in a New York minute, whether it is a hurricane, an earthquake, very quickly, ships, goods, help, assistance, bringing children over to different countries to make sure they get an education. When there's a cry for help, they quickly understand functional cooperation and they make it work. We just got to translate it to these bigger things that really will take us forward.
Thank you. There's a line of thought that suggests that that we do tend to be good, especially in economics. We respond to crisis, and we seem to have perfected that. The next level now is to be able to prevent crisis by the way that we cooperate. And so I'm hoping that that can be further seen for the benefit of all people. Because when I think about some of our sisters and brothers in the Eastern Caribbean, there are real benefits that they enjoy to the cooperation. And I'm encouraged, I have not heard too much recently about it, but I'm encouraged by the efforts around the single rate for mobile communications. And I hope that these are the real things that CARICOM turns its attention to that can really benefit people where it matters and can keep with them some disposable income so they don't have to pay as much for the things that we do every day so that they can spend their resources on other things. The final question that I have has to do with our approach to technology and the case that we are making to the international community for some of the technological issues that bedevil us. What do I mean? Now, we have continued to have challenges with the way that Barbadians can show up online, the way that we can do business on online platforms. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that those who are making the decisions with respect to technology and the regulation of those tech spaces are in other places, driven by other legislation in other jurisdictions. And really, while this may not be a strict country-to-country bilateral conversation, it really is a conversation that has to take place at a different level. And so we know that the future of trade is really how people relate to each other online. If you're not on Amazon, on Alibaba, on these major platforms, you're not in anything. And for a lot of our business people, that is where they want to be. But there are tremendous barriers to be able to operate equally with other vendors and other business people in those spaces. So my question for you, Minister, is what is the level of representation that we are making to be able to move that needle? What is the capacity for us as a country or as a region to be able to be involved in some of this technology regulation, which is really, as are the Bretton Woods institutions, really controlled by larger powers, but that control is causing our commercial sectors to be at a disadvantage in those online spaces. What is the next step in liberalizing that space so that people here in Barbados who are creating content online, who are trading products online, can truly, really benefit from a global marketplace?
Honourable Member, much like our colleague from Christchurch West this morning, you have invited me to go into a domain that is not strictly speaking within the four corners of the business of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. I do know that some of our officers have attended conferences, for example, on the digital economy, and one of them is the Director of Trade, and I'm going to give her an opportunity to share some thoughts if she cares to on this matter. But just out of an abundance of caution, I want to say that a number of the things you've raised would fall within the context of what is being discussed at or should be discussed, and the International Telecommunications Union, the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, etc. And they fall more within the domain of our friend who is minister responsible for industry, and equally it would fall within the domain of CARICOM. But having said that, you deserve an answer because you're raising a very important matter. Before you rebut, before you...
No, I just wanted to clarify that these are matters that were raised during UNCTAD 15. These are matters that are squarely within the realm of trade and development. In particular, because the future of trade is in these online platforms. So it's not necessarily a telecommunications issue, it is a technology issue. And I see some of your officers may be agreeing with me. I won't tell you which ones. But I do encourage us to turn our minds to the discussion, and I would be grateful for any conversation we can have on that matter.
Well, and as you would appreciate, Honourable Member, I have a duty to be guided by my most senior officer. She who sits next to me shares my thoughts. But it might be a good thing if we heard from Mr. Carlos Wharton, as well as the Director of Trade on this matter, because I accept that there are trade-related issues. I think the real issue is here how they are managed and where from, because they do not, strictly speaking, fall within the remit of that which we do. Ms. Seeley?
Thank you very much, Minister. And this topic is very interesting, having recently participated in a workshop on the digital economy with an emphasis on the legal background of things. And it really opened our eyes to the situation in the country, as there are many moving parts, some of which are in place, there are some which are desired, but there is a dire need, I must say, to bring all these moving parts together as it relates to the digital economy. There are parts which fall under the ministry responsible for industry. There are parts which fall under customs, parts which fall under the Office of the Attorney General, business. There are many ministries, and the workshop opened our eyes that we would have thought maybe it probably fell within one or two. But at the national level, we would wish to follow up at the appropriate time, and I believe it's sooner than later, on mapping a strategy to implement a digital economy in Barbados, which I believe would take into account some of the concerns you have raised relative to opportunities for businesses, services providers, the security side of things. There's also the acceptance of digitally generated paper documents, business documents. And I think if we want to really transcend Barbados' trade to another level, it would be remiss of us not to seize the opportunity to fully implement the digital economy. One other aspect I would wish to raise is the existence of the Caribbean Telecoms Union in the region. And this is a regional institution which played a central part in brokering the agreement between, I believe, the two major phone companies in the region to bring the rates down as it relates to voice and data, and the role which they can play in executing just what you have identified, articulated. They can play, not necessarily executing, but playing a meaningful supporting role in helping the region to get to where it needs to get. I know as well the heads have been looking at generating jobs, I believe, digital jobs, especially for the youth of this region. So just to say it is something which is receiving our attention at different levels. It's being prioritized by the heads, and I believe shortly be prioritized at the national level. I will turn over now to my colleague, Mr. Wharton.
Thank you, Director. Honourable Member, Chair, the question in relation to technology transfer is a very complex one, but it definitely was a very sour bone of contention during the UNCTAD 15 negotiations, where on the one hand, you would have developing countries seeking greater access to IP-related information, seeking greater access to technologies, and the owners of the technology, often from the developed countries, being reticent in providing such access or source codes. So if one were to ask me what should Barbados, or by extension CARICOM, do with respect to improving their access to technologies, yes, it is important to have a common front in international organizations like UNCTAD that is responsible for looking at trade and technology transfer. But I would also internally conduct some kind of audit in terms of what technologies are required for us to improve GDP, or for us to ensure that we have factories and workplaces that are fit for a 21st century business environment. You need to figure out who produces these technologies, or who can help you in some kind of innovation program to produce these type of technologies. And rather than go the multilateral route, you may have to consider going the bilateral route and using South-South cooperation initiatives and techniques to woo potential partners to either share the technology or to license the technology on some commercial basis. But that would be my suggestions, Honourable Member, with respect to transfer technology and making some movements in that space. Thanks.
I would just like to add one comment to that. Something that is of concern to me has been the issue of big data. And when you look at the negotiations going on across the world, you are constantly seeing coming up in those discussions the issue of cooperation around big data, because at the end of the day, whoever controls the data and the information about what you do and what you like and how you operate online, etc., all of those things are going to give the owners or the persons with access to that data a superior advantage in terms of their positioning in the next level of economic growth. And that is what is of concern to me, and that is why I feel very, very strongly that one of the things we need to be carefully discussing with our South-South partners is being able to establish those types of online platforms and to look at how we are going to take control of our data and be able to use it to position for economic growth and development. Otherwise, what will happen, just like in the early days, the control of the ships, the control of the finance led to the dominance of certain countries in the world economic system. And if we are to have a fighting chance to be a part of the wealth, we are going to have to rethink how we're going to deal with data and who we engage with and how we engage. So I share your concern.
Thanks, ministers and team. Chair, those are all my questions today.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for St. Michael West.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's good evening by now, Honourable Ministers and team. Congratulations to you, Senior Minister, on your appointment to what is a very important ministry. So I'm sure there's no question in all my colleagues' minds of the importance of this ministry at this time in our history. They say that uncertainty is a new certainty in this current global environment. This uncertain world that we live in permeates every facet of our lives, whether it's economic uncertainty, uncertainty in peace and security, food insecurity, and obviously uncertainty in climate. So, sir, there's no doubt in my mind that this particular ministry holds the utmost importance to Barbadians due to these factors. And as you said in the well, for the first time, being in the well for the first time is important in educating and sensitizing Barbadians to this importance, especially for a small island developing state at this time in our uncertain world. So the issue with being at the tail end of the baton is that most of my questions were already answered. So I just have one question for you, sir. So you're the perfect person, the ideal individual actually to answer this question, specifically because of your previous portfolio as the Minister of Energy. So as a small island developing states, we are the least offenders when it comes to affecting climate change, but we suffer the most from the ravages. And as you said earlier, through the Honourable Prime Minister's efforts, this small nation has become somewhat of a moral authority on this issue, representing really and truly all small island developing states. Quite recently, it's been brought to my attention that Barbados actually ranks in the top 5 and top 10 in terms of renewable energy penetration, projects penetrations per capita in the world, which when it was said to me, it was quite an amazing thing. We have a strong history when it comes to solar panels, but now we're up there with PV, which is quite the accomplishment. So there are a few large local producers that would like to accumulate and trade in carbon credits in concert with their carbon reduction projects. We know that these credits were first developed as part of the UN framework on climate change and the Kyoto Protocol, which has since expired and has been replaced by the Paris Accord. So, sir, can you advise large local installers on the status of trading these carbon credits under this agreement? Thank you.
I think that the question of trading carbon credits probably would be answered better than I can if I were to direct you to Mr. Tyrone Brathwaite, who is perhaps the closest thing that we have to the in-house specialist on that particular matter. But before I go there, I would simply say to you that you are right. There is first of all, there's a very clear-cut achievement that this country has made with respect to investment in solar PV, and the penetration of solar PV in Barbados now perhaps is the highest in the hemisphere outside of the United States of America. The need for us now to go to the next step to build the relationship between, as you quite rightly say, the trade in credits and the investment which is being made is the missing link in this, perhaps. Is Mr. Brathwaite at the microphone? Yeah. Okay, he is now at the microphone, and I will give him the opportunity to speak to this.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Senior Minister. Thank you, Minister MP Gibbs. The matter of carbon trading and those kinds of issues are really technical issues, not necessarily falling under the portfolio of the Foreign Ministry, more so those would fall to Minister Ford's, I believe, his ministry as the technical leads on the climate change portfolio. So unfortunately, I am not in a position to answer your very pertinent and very searching question. So I shall have to defer. Thank you.
I understand. Go ahead.
Yes, Your Honourable Representative. A little bit like the previous questions, this ministry is very much in the forefront of representing Barbados's interests. We know that. We've spent several hours discussing that. What is key in this representation is that there's a coordination and sharing of information between ministries, amongst ministries, so that where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is at the table, is in the negotiations, what we're articulating are policies which might not be born from this ministry, but which we would have become aware of. And our key contribution in this instance is that we are saying to the technicians who are talking about the trading carbon credits, we understand what you're saying. You tell us rather what you want, and we will tell you how to negotiate this, or we will negotiate this for you in the national arena. We will work the alliances that Barbados has as a small island developing state, as a member of any other grouping that you might wish to mention, AOSIS, Commonwealth, any grouping where they're like-minded states, where there's a body of, for want of a word, negotiating strength, and we will help negotiate these things. Also, it's partly, so there's that aspect that this is what we do, which is why it sounds as if we can't answer you directly, but we envelop the issues and we take it to the outside world. And then we also advocate on the interests, on these said things. And it could be here with international civil NGO organizations. For example, we all know here that Barbados has sat and talked about debt for nature swaps, and we've tried different things. There are many aspects which swirl around this. So that's where our strength is, that's where our role is, and not necessarily speaking to you about the technical details of trading carbon credits. So I hope that will satisfy you, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I look forward to you adopting at some point to your agenda and working with other agencies so that we can get that, see some comfort for large installers of solar PV. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for St. John.
Thank you, Chair. I have one question for the ministers. sports related. From time to time, I have been asked, and the Honourable Member for St. James South would have assisted, in sorting visas for persons who are on the national team and having some difficulties in getting those visas. Recent time, one of the national federations would have asked an officer at my ministry to assist with sorting visas for a national team that was coming, for our team that was coming from Africa. I just want to know the process of having these visas sorted, or which area in your ministry I can link to have a direct contact in a situation where we have one, like I said, a national team member who is without a visa, or two, a team that is coming in and requests assistance in relation to that. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, sir. In the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there's a Consular Relations Division which processes visas, the role of which in regard to visas is primarily to process it on behalf of Barbadian government officials or representatives traveling overseas. There are indeed instances where we get requests pertaining to incoming delegations, groups of delegations, be it for a meet, what you mentioned, a sports meet. Often it's for a conference. And the ministry can be instrumental in receiving those and conveying the request for the visas to the Immigration Department, because at the end of the day, Foreign Affairs cannot issue visas, but we can be the interlocutor between an entity or a country who is seeking to send people to Barbados for an event. And be conveyed to Ministry of Immigration.
Sorry, Chair, I really am not hearing what the PS is saying. I'm not hearing you at all.
All right. I'm sorry. I think I was trying to see you and still speak. I apologize. Let me just concentrate on speaking.
Yes, do that. Speak into the chair and he will listen.
Thank you for that guidance, Chair. What I was trying to say is that the Ministry of, let me go to the bottom line, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs does not issue visas. But what we do serve as is as an interlocutor. We can serve as an interlocutor through the consular division in terms of receiving from outside entities an indication that they have, because of any sort of meeting or gathering in Barbados, there are a set of individuals who need to travel to Barbados who require visas. Part of when there's a meeting held in Barbados of whatever nature is the conversation as to whether visas will be issued on arrival or whether they have to be issued, people have to come with a visa in their passport. And Foreign Affairs can be part of that conversation with the Immigration Department, which is the department that has responsibility for the issuance of visas for entry into Barbados. Is that clearer, Chair?
Yes, it is. So I just have my PS send correspondence to you requesting the clearance. Is that what you're saying? Or is there a particular department within the ministry that the correspondence should go to?
I would like to suggest that, as with the norm for intra-ministerial communication, it be addressed to the permanent secretary, and it can be copied to the consular division. Unfortunately, we have just seen that, I can't call a name because we've just seen that colleague leave on Friday for pre-retirement leave, and we've not yet settled on the replacement. But if it's sent to the permanent secretary, I think that is the best route that I would like to suggest. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Before the Honourable Minister wraps up, having listened to the entire discussion and to the PS for that ministry a short while ago. I'm still concerned about what is in place for members of parliament. Do we plan to set up a facility, saying that you're dealing with foreign affairs and members of parliament travel from time to time? I know we are accommodated with the use of the Grace Adams suite, etc. But before you get to that point, will there be a facility set up, or could we consider where all members of parliament in terms of traveling would be facilitated? Because applying for a visa sometimes can be the process is very difficult and very tedious. And I believe that if you're at this stage and with this status, that it should be facilitated. Does the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have any plans to, or could consider setting up a facility that this would be easily facilitated?
Thank you, Chair. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is always active in assisting members, government representatives when they go on business, when they're traveling on behalf of Barbados. The international norms make it difficult for us to do so when it's a tourist-related trip. And this is often because there are different types of visas that are being requested, and the countries, and I don't really want to call a country's name here now, but they wish to have explicit written identification of what meeting someone is going to, etc. And there's that. There are those parameters within which we work in terms of assisting with the issuance of visas for entry into foreign countries on behalf of anyone. With regard to the use of the Grace Adams suite, the VIP lounge, with the minister's agreement, I'd like to convey that question to the Chief of Protocol, Ms. Risa Lane.
Good afternoon, Honourable Chairman, Honourable Members. My name is Risa Lane. I'm the Acting Chief of Protocol, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. Yes, Honourable Chairman, members of Parliament are allowed the use of the Grace Adams suite when travelling abroad. I believe some of you already submit requests for use of the suite. What we urge persons to do is to submit the request at least 48 hours in advance of the proposed travel. That way we are able to facilitate you in the best way we can. But yes, you are allowed the use of the Grace Adams suite, and I'm not sure if you had any other specific questions in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Minister, you may wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me also extend my thanks to all honourable members who participated in this discussion, and obviously also my thanks to Minister Husbands and the rest of the team here with me. Mr. Chairman, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade absolutely relishes this first opportunity that we have had to participate in this tangible way in the debate on the estimates of revenue and expenditure for the government of Barbados. This year we were allocated a sum of $65,608,446 in the estimates of revenue and expenditure for this financial year. And as you have heard, sir, that money has been dedicated in part to what I would wish to call a robust prosecution of Barbados's international trade objectives. We have discussed today some important issues relating to the preserving of policy space for Barbados to pursue a trade strategy in order to boost opportunities for growth. We've also been able to discuss today the importance for us to continue to negotiate agreements which enhance Barbados's trade and development opportunities. We've touched on the question, I think the vital question of South-South engagement and the need to locate investment and trade opportunities in the South, new opportunities, and of course the fostering of relationships, Mr. Chairman, which again advance our local development interests and our trade prospects. All of these things that we are talking about have taken place within a context. We just heard the Honourable Member for St. Michael West made the point that the context in which we live is one of uncertainty. The global trade environment itself has been a very volatile and unpredictable place over the last few years, born largely out of the COVID pandemic and the impact of that pandemic. But of course, all of the things which we have had to live through, the disruption that has been of a logistical nature and has led to increasing prices for key inputs and commodities, the shortages of key products, food and food production insecurity, mounting transportation costs, which are a byproduct of the Kremlin's war, and which has impacted the entire world, quite frankly. And all the while, we've been grappling with the other things which are fundamental to our existence. The question of climate change, the difficulties, sir, in correspondent banking relationships, and I could go on and on. There are a litany of challenges, many of which are unprecedented, but we soldier manfully on with a view to trying to confront and overcome all of them in the interest of the people of Barbados. It is for this reason, sir, that we so relish the opportunity to have had this engagement, because I think if there's been a takeaway today from me, it has been that listening to my colleagues, there are obviously questions being asked out there and being posed in here on behalf of their constituents, which relate to why we do the things we do and the merits of doing the things we do. And I hope, sir, that that has been something that now has been adequately and successfully answered. So having welcomed the opportunity and thanked colleagues for participating, sir, I am now indebted to you for your patience in relating to me as the leader of this team, and for your very competent management of this process. I salute you, sir. And I ask that Head 32 stand part.
The question is that Head 32 stand part. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I now beg to move that you report progress to His Honour the Speaker, and beg permission to sit again.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honour the Speaker and ask for leave to sit again. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported progress and requests leave to sit again. Honourable for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that this honourable chamber be now suspended till tomorrow the 7th, Tuesday the 7th at 10 a.m.
The question is that this honourable chamber be suspended until Tuesday, the 7th day of March, 2023 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until Tuesday, the 7th day of March, 2023 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.